Shalom. Throughout the Torah, actually throughout the Bible, you find many calls for social justice, specifically for economic justice, that we should do right by all of the citizens of our society, whether they are rich or whether they are poor. In this week's Torah portion, Bahar Bechukutai, it's a double portion that brings to a conclusion our reading of the book of Leviticus this year. We read about two laws that were put into place in ancient Israel. One of the laws was the law called the sabbatical year. Every seventh year, every indentured slave was allowed to go free. No person who was indentured to serve another person was to be in that situation, that lowered economic situation in perpetuity. 6 years was as long as you could be an indentured slave in ancient Israel. The other law was the law about the Jubilee year. We are told in chapter 25, verse 8 in Leviticus that we are to count off 7 weeks of years, 7 times 7 years, so that the period of 7 weeks of years gives you a total of 49 years. And then you shall sound the loud horn in the 7th month on the 10th day of the month, the Day of Atonement. And you shall have the horn sounded throughout your land. And you shall hallow the 50th year. You shall proclaim liberty throughout the land for all its inhabitants. And that particular line, you shall proclaim liberty throughout the land for all of its inhabitants, is actually, these words from this week's Torah portion are actually inscribed on the Liberty Bell in Philadelphia, that same bell that was rung on the 4th of July, 1776, proclaiming the independence of the United States from Great Britain. It goes on to tell us, this law regarding the Jubilee year, goes on to tell us that that land holdings that were sold by poor people during economic crises, during hard times, was to be returned to those farmers, those poor farmers, or to their living heirs. That poor people were to have restored to them land that they had sold. In other words, that they could only lease out the land for the number of years that remained between that time and the time of the next Jubilee year. Now, we see that there was this sense that there had to be economic justice, that if you follow the laws of the Torah, you had to be sensitive to the needs of poor people. Well, I saw something, we all saw something, happen in Washington, D.C. last week that made me think about these calls for social justice in the Bible. We have something called the sequester in place these days. Our lawmakers in Washington have not been able to come to a consensus about an economic policy that would chart our economic future in this country for the next few years. And so, since they could not come to an agreement, they said that on a particular date, I think it was at the end of January, that there would be a 10% cut in all programs in the federal budget. But last week, those cuts began to hurt. They began to hurt. Who did they hurt last week? They hurt congressmen and senators who are frequent flyers. You see, that 10% cut across the board caused thousands of air traffic controllers to be furloughed. Last week alone, there were 5,000 delayed flights in America. Well, this was inconvenient for our lawmakers, and you know what? They changed it to make their lives easier. Next week, the sequester will have a drastic effect on another segment of the American public, that is the poor. Next week, subsidies, housing subsidies for disabled people, elderly people, people in poverty, wounded warriors, veterans who have come back incapacitated from fighting our nation's wars, will have a 10% cut in their subsidies that help them to put a roof over their heads. And no more new people will be eligible for this program. This means that the ranks of America's homeless are going to grow. This means that people today who have a roof over their heads might not have a roof over their heads next week. These are people who don't have a lot of political clout. These are people that the Torah is concerned about, and the Torah tells us to be concerned about. I'd like to share with you a passage from the book of Isaiah that speaks specifically to legislation that has a pernicious effect on the poor. Let's take a look at it. This is taken from the 10th chapter of the book of Isaiah. Notice in English it says, ha, with an exclamation point. The word in Hebrew is oi, woe. Woe to those who write out evil writs and compose iniquitous documents, to subvert the cause of the poor, to rob of their rights the needy of my people, that widows may be their spoils, and the fatherless children their booty. In my opinion, what our leaders in Washington are doing is writing evil decrees, evil writs, pernicious laws, laws that oppress the neediest, the weakest, the most vulnerable people in our country. If our leaders in Washington do not make an exception, especially with regard to those people who receive subsidies for housing next week, I believe that they're going to go down in history as being the most insensitive, self-serving, and hypocritical Congress of all time. They can say all that they like. They can say as often and as powerfully as they like that they subscribe to the moral and ethical precepts of the Bible. But unless they make an exception to help the poor and the disabled and the elderly with regard to housing subsidies, and do it very, very soon, all I can say to them is woe, woe. Now, what I hope that you will do, I have a little homework assignment for you. I hope that you will contact your senators and your representative, your congressional representative, and tell them how important this is and to do the right thing. Well, I hope that you will read this week's Torah portion and come to your own conclusions. Shabbat Shalom.
أبا شمعون كن بعوني لا دعيتك عينني أبا شمعون كن بعوني لا دعيتك عينني لا دعيتك نصب